other move and allows economics to recede into the background, allows these questions about what a market is and is there a religious critique of markets and all these things. All that recedes beyond this sort of great cloud of ecumenical blandness which the religious right has deployed to tremendous effect, and the religious left kind of trots along behind them.
Two more questions. Uganda.
Uganda. Well, Uganda, we were talking about Uganda. Some of you may know, has been a little bit on the radio, and it should be more. Uganda's on the verge of passing something called the 2009 Anti-Homosexuality Bill. Uganda's not too progressive on homosexuality already. It's illegal. But now it can be punished by the death penalty. And if you know someone who is queer and you don't report that person, you go to prison for 7 years. And the bill is written such to make clear that this is also directed, by the way, at foreign aid workers, and to say, you know what, we want this bill to be a model for other nations, which is no surprise because the bill was made in America. Uganda is one of the really great, what we're just talking about, Uganda is one of these cases where the religious right says, hey, this rhetoric, I have a heart for Africa. We were talking before this about Senator Sam Brownback as a right-wing Republican, but gets a lot of Nick Kristof at the New York Times, the allegedly liberal columnist, says, well, Sam Brownback he's going to Africa and he cares about Africa, and I don't see these liberals going to Africa. He is going to Africa. He is going to Uganda, just like Senator James Inhofe goes to Uganda as much as he can. And they know that they can use their influence there to experiment, to try all the kind of legislation that they can't quite get done here, that they can rely on backing, as I just learned from Sekou, of guys like Pastor Rick Warren. Of course, remember from the inauguration, here's a guy who's backing this really barbaric law in Uganda. Now, meanwhile, of course, the United States is pouring military aid into the country as well. All these relationships take place, but again, we have this problem. How do we sort of, the art is falling off the walls. How do we sort of take back this language? And I hear again and again, we heard especially with Rick Warren, well, now that the religious right is talking about climate change, they're talking about Africa, they're talking about poverty, they're talking about AIDS. Well, I guess we won. They're talking about our issues. And no one paid attention and says, yeah, that's right, the religious right is talking about AIDS and poverty in Africa. They have a great idea, the death penalty for gay Ugandans. They have a great approach to climate change. We need to have more free markets. Climate change, of course, is a result of socialism. And if we had free markets, the free markets will correct that. So, but we've ceded so much ground linguistically to the religious right. They almost, and this is really an organizing question then for you, is how as an organizer do you do this? Because this is language that I think a lot of progressives, a lot of leftists and liberals, they love this language. They consider it their own. How do you say, you've given that language away and you're going to have to come up with new terms, and those terms are going to they're going to feel rough at first.
Well, I think the interesting thing about Uganda, to kind of lay out a historical terrain around it, is that this is not the first time the religious right has made these investments in Africa. No. Pat Robertson, for instance, used to own the third largest network in the United States, Fox News. You don't own the third largest network in the U.S. with church money, right? You can't preach up that kind of money. So he cut a deal with Mobutu, the most vicious dictator in African history, for diamonds, called the African Diamond Company. It's a powerful article, I believe, by Terence Rafferty in GQ. I read it for the articles. Secondly, he cut a deal with Charles Taylor. And went around the country saying that Charles Taylor has made a confession in Jesus. He's a really good guy. He's been prosecuted inappropriately. Charles Taylor, the dictator from Liberia. And so Uganda, I was recently with Olora Alatun, who is going to stand for president of Uganda, and I'll be going there in the next several months with him former Undersecretary for the United Nations for Children. And I asked him, I said, how are things in Uganda? He says, the conditions of the people are murderous. And so this is who Rick Warren is working with, because Rwanda and Uganda are going to be purpose-driven nations based on his book. And so, and so I asked, and he was saying the U.S. is giving a lot of cover. Obama administration is doing cover for the Ugandan government. I said, well, what is there? He says they've just discovered oil. It may be the 5th largest reserve, untapped reserve in the world, in Uganda. And so this relationship between the religious right, with, and also around international capital and globalization, is one that ultimately has murderous implications for the people of Africa. And so I think part and parcel of the reality is that there has to be a commitment to the prophetic tradition, which means you stand outside. Right? So many of my friends have rushed into the White House. And because of that access that they have inside the White House, they won't bear a critique. And then those of us on the left who bear a critique, the administration meets weekly with social movements and says these are our issues and these are the ones you need to be selling. And there is hell to pay. Look at Van Jones. Right? Let's be clear. They never lied on Van. Right? But they came for him. No social movement to protect him, and the administration rolled him under the bus. Right? And so this is part of it, that there must be a willing to stand outside. And part and parcel has to do with also the Democratic establishment, because Obama has a new machine protecting him. It's not the Clinton machine, but it is an interesting configuration of new money, new individuals, folks inside